You know all about the candidates running for president, but what do you know about the local races, the ones that will directly affect our lives here and change the face of Tucson? You've got questions, we have answers. This is Metro Week. This week was the deadline for candidates to make it to Arizona's August primary ballot, and I've asked my fellow journalists to help set the stage and explain what voters can expect. Here in the studio are my colleague Christopher Conover, plus Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and Becky of the Arizona Daily Star. Christopher, I want to start with the biggest race in the state, the one everybody will vote on or have a chance to vote in, is the Arizona Senate race. Tell us about that race, which McCain currently holds the seat.
Exactly. The incumbent is John McCain, very well known. He's probably got somewhere close to 100% name recognition in the state. But he has a primary once again. He had a primary 6 years ago, and he has one now. This primary, he has former state lawmaker Kelly Ward, Claire Van Steenwyk, and Alex Malusky are all running against him in the Republican primary. Whomever comes out of that will face current member of Congress in the 1st Congressional District, Ann Kirkpatrick as the Democrat, and Frank Tamburri as the Libertarian in November. Most people believe McCain can come out of this, but even he says this is the toughest race he's had.
Doesn't he say that every year?
He does, but this year I think he means it more, especially assuming he gets out of the primary and gets to the general. Ann Kirkpatrick is going to, I think, give him a run. I won't predict the voters. I've learned not to predict voters what will happen come November, but I think it's going to be an interesting race.
And then we have primaries in Arizona's 1st and 2nd congressional districts. Just real quick, run through those.
The 1st Congressional District is the big district, if you will. It covers most of the state. It runs from Marana and our area all the way up to the Utah-Arizona state line. That seat's currently held, as we said, by Ann Kirkpatrick, but it's an open seat because she's running for Senate. There are a number of Republicans running, names you know, names you don't know, running for that. And then Tom O'Halloran, there's one Democrat running.
And then in Congressional District 2, we have Democrats seeking a primary.
We do. We have 2 Democrats, Victoria Steele and Matt Hines. Somewhat familiar names to people who follow politics, and they're both hoping one of them will unseat incumbent Martha McSally. Again, that's going to be an interesting race. There's a lot of national interest in that, especially financial national interest. There's big money that's going to roll into that race after the primary.
And those are the races I think people watch a lot of. They see TV ads. There's a lot of information about those coming out. But Dylan, so many seats in the county are also up this year. So because we can't talk about them all, I'm going to have you talk about law enforcement. So there's a sheriff's race and a county attorney race. Tell us about those. Primaries, I mean.
In the primary, there are 2 Republicans who are seeking to challenge Sheriff Chris Nanos. We have Mark Napier, who's making a second run at that, and Terry Staten, who is works for the Sheriff's Department himself, and they're going to face off in the Republican primary.
We should remind people that Chris Nanos, the present sheriff, is a Democrat, and he was appointed because he replaced Sheriff Clarence Dupnick, who left in the middle of his term.
Appointed about a year ago.
Yeah. So he's seeking his first election.
Yeah, he's
for
going.
First full term.
There's nobody challenging him, but so he'll be on the ballot in November. But he's trying to be elected sheriff for the first time.
And there are 2 Democrats in the county attorney's race also.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that we're seeing specific races where there are many people trying to be the nominee of their party, and other races where nobody's running at all. Where we pretty much have one candidate. But one of those that is something that people are chasing after this year is we have a Democrat who is challenging longtime Democratic County Attorney Barbara Lawal, and so we'll see how that ends up playing out. It's a race that has attracted a lot more money than you would expect.
Dylan, what do you think about the Pima County Board of Supervisors races? Because we have Republican primaries with Allie Miller in District 1, and then with Ray Carroll retiring in District 4, that seat's wide open. We're already starting to hear people say things like, well, that candidate's not my kind of Republican. So how are those races going to play out?
That's another one where we're seeing a couple of seats where there are no Republicans challenging the sitting Democrats, but in the more Republican districts, there are a lot of people who want to run. We've got John Winchester, who's challenging Allie Miller in the primary on the Republican side, and then 3 candidates who are trying to be basically the replacement for Ray Carroll. Isn't going to be a Democrat even running in that race in the general election. The Democrats have long written that off. It's such a Republican seat.
We're going to stop our conversation at this point. That's a lot of races that we've gone through that voters are going to see on their ballot. But so far, the daily political din is about the presidential races.
I have raised a tremendous amount of money for the vets, almost $6 million, and more money is going to come in, I believe.
Obviously, now Donald Trump has secured enough delegates to win the Republican nomination at that party's convention. And Hillary Clinton is far closer to securing the Democratic nomination than her rival Bernie Sanders.
The stakes in this election just keep getting higher and higher.
One person, one vote. You're rich, you got one vote. You're poor, you get one vote.
But polls consistently show voters have an unfavorable opinion of both Trump and Democratic frontrunner Clinton. They have a favorable opinion of Sanders, but he's lagging in delegates. So earlier this week, I asked Pima County political leaders Joe Holt of the Democratic Party and Bill Beard of the Republican Party to tell me what all that means for local races.
Campaigns can oftentimes be a roller coaster, and folks that have been paying attention at the national level, I would definitely say the roller coaster has been in full effect for pretty much anyone that likes or even just wants to be a casual observer of politics. I think in this kind of environment at the national level, it will inevitably filter down to the local level. There will be candidates, and we don't know yet what will take place, but there will probably be candidacies that are affected by that national roller coaster. There are probably going to be some things happening locally that just make the roller coaster on the local level be even more involved, more ups and downs, more spins and twirls and whatnot that will probably come November 9th, people are going to wake up and go, whew, I'm glad it's over, but they're also going to be shaking their heads wondering what it was that actually happened.
I'll also add that in this area, we're not done on Election Day, typically. We have a few weeks of close races that we have to decide.
And this year, there will probably be a great number of those.
Yeah, you know, I think that it's pretty clear that people feel more and more disengaged from the big race, the presidential race, for example. It's something that happens, especially here in Arizona, it's something that happens somewhere else, largely. And they don't, I think they actually look forward to a lot of the local races. Then they get actually a little bit more engaged because this is something, these are people that I can actually meet and talk with and understand, maybe to some extent, how those positions, how those elected positions actually affect my day-to-day life.
And do you think people understand? I mean, I think it's more important when you vote for school board or county supervisor or legislature than it necessarily is for president.
I've long maintained that when you're setting up the ballot, you should start with the local races because those are the races that truly affect people's pocketbooks on a day-to-day basis. It's not that the presidency is not important and the Senate and the House. It's just in terms of what people have a direct tie to what someone that's elected at the local level, the votes they take on a daily basis directly impact people's pocketbooks, the ability to conduct business in their professional life, in their personal life. All of those things are directly affected when you go and vote yes or no for candidate X, Y, or Z at the local level.
Do you think that people understand that, though? You both have said those are very important. Do you think voters understand they're more important?
It's a real problem. It is a real problem. And I like the idea of if the ballot, rearrange the ballot, turn the ballot upside down.
That's what you're talking about?
To some extent.
It's not going to happen, but we can talk about it at least anyway, right? But I think it's so important that people do understand that. And I think too many people think, oh, school board, ho-hum, snore. And yet we've got some major battles going on, for some school board elections and county board of supervisors. Oh my goodness, the impact they have on business It's remarkable.
And I believe, going back to that discussion about the roller coaster, there's going to be some roller coaster effects, not just because of the attention the national races are going to bring when you bring it home, the Democrats supporting the Democrat candidate, Republicans supporting Donald Trump, et cetera. But that's going to filter down to who is supporting those state legislative races, who is supporting those local county supervisor races, the sheriff, all of those races that don't always get a lot of attention, but in this kind of environment, they're probably going to receive more scrutiny than they otherwise would receive.
I think that could very, very well be, because people are looking for something they can identify with, and that they feel actually really does have a direct impact on their lives, even though I think too many people don't actually understand that.
And I think that ties into something, it's been a point of contention that I've held for a long time, that the basic understanding of what government is actually supposed to do for you in your daily life. Is there a limit to where government should be involved in your life? Our political parties disagree to a great deal on where that line is drawn. I think in the environment that the national race is going to bring, there's going to be the candidates at the local level that can tie into that disenchantment with, say, what's going on in Washington, D.C., or to some extent outside of Pima County or outside the city of Tucson or Cerrito or whatever it happens to be. The candidates that can tie that discontent in and bring it home to their own backyard will be candidates that will probably have a greater impact and a greater chance of success come election time, regardless of the political party this year.
Yeah, and that's probably true almost every election season.
With so much attention on the presidential candidates, how does someone running for local office distinguish himself or herself from those national party platforms?
I think that those candidates have to bring it back to the issues, the Arizona issues.
What are some of those right now?
The state issues. And, well, look at Arizona. It depends upon if you want to look at social things, or if you want to look at economic things, and try to understand how those two are related to one another. But look at the level of poverty here in Arizona and the number of children that are being raised in poverty. That's a real issue, and that's an economic issue. In fact, you could even consider it to be primarily an economic issue. It pulls all the rest of us down. That's something you can talk about that people will see with their own eyes.
And directly to that point, this part of the state of Arizona has actually been dragging down some of the overall statistics for poverty, for financial gains, for the economic growth, because of the poor policies at the local level. Some of the Board of Supervisors' actions over the years have been anti-business, have been telling businesses, that welcome mat you think is there isn't really there. Those are the kinds of things that I think, again, tying back into that roller coaster and discontent, candidates that can tie that discontent directly into what's going on in their own neighborhoods, poor roads, poor funding for police and fire. You've got a sheriff's department, you've got many of their officers that are leaving simply because they've been promised raises by the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors, but year in, year out, they never come about. Those things are going to have a direct impact for people's daily lives, and if the candidates that are out there showing how they're going to change things, how they're going to bring better funding to the Sheriff's Department, put money into actually repairing roads, those basic things that government is supposed to do regardless of your political philosophy. That's kind of the minimum standard government is expected to do by most citizens. If you can't get that right, all the other things, be they social issues or something else, are way down on the priority list.
And that brings up a really interesting point about local races, is that those kinds of issues could help people, if the candidate does this right, they can help people to understand how everything is tied in with everything else. Because you can look at the state legislative majority and see how difficult they've made life for the counties, and they continue to do this, especially like by sweeping HERF funds and things like that.
That's transportation funding.
And yeah, transportation funding, exactly. And the fact that you can't just look at a school board candidate and that's all there is to it. What they do at that level is related, directly connected to what the county is doing, to what city is doing, and to what the state is doing. And what a great opportunity to actually begin to understand some of this. Now, I know I'm dreaming, okay, because I know most people, I swear, I do believe that most people are so busy with their day-to-day life. They work full-time, they have children, or they have grandchildren, or they have some other, you know, they have their own parents. Let's say we have these multi-generational households now, also driven, I think, a lot by economics. They don't have time to think about this.
Well, I think you mentioned, you know, what a school board member is going to do, essentially saying, you know, the state legislature is responsible for what happens, say, in TUSD. I would suggest to the average person out there that who is sitting on the school board for Tucson Unified School District, they're the ones that are making the decisions about how much money goes into the classroom versus how much goes to 1010. That is something that is not controlled by the legislature. That is not something that when the governor signs the budget, that is not determined by the governor of Arizona. That is determined by a 3-member majority on the Tucson Unified School District. That is something that happens locally, day in, day out, that directly impacts people's lives living in TUSD. That kind of stuff, if you dismiss it as being someone else's fault, it's the blame of the legislature, the blame of the governor or someone else, basically doesn't understand what TUSD is actually responsible for. Putting money into the classroom, they all say that that's what they're going to do, but the budgets they keep passing shrinks the amount of money over the last 5 years that's actually gone into education in the classroom because of that majority sitting on the TUSD school board.
Yeah, they have to take responsibility for their own actions. There's no doubt about that. But once again, there's always that effort to take a complex situation, which would be a school board's budget that they have to deal with, which is remarkably complicated, and take 1 or 2 things out of that and focus on those things independently of everything else that has happened on that budget, and to be able to actually define terms like what are monies that are being used in the classroom and how would you actually define that.
And I'm going to actually stop us from having an entire school board debate here, although this is fascinating and we actually hope that we hear some of this more from candidates. But I do want to find out how both of you are grappling with or embracing or just approaching the large amount of independent voters in Pima County. How do your parties, you guys are both political parties, how do you approach that?
Everybody that studies the numbers, the targeting folks, if you will, the real policy guru folks that really burrow into the numbers, they always come back to the same thing. Independents say they're independent, but the majority of the time they either lean to the left or they lean to the right.
But you don't know who they are, correct? Which ones are which?
You can identify who those are based on what part of the county they live in. You cross-reference it with the voting patterns of that particular jurisdiction, that particular precinct, say. You can pretty much, with 90+% certainty, identify what those independents in that particular area are going to do. Our job on the Republican side is to find those independents that would lean toward Republican candidates and get them to vote. I'm sure Jo tries to do the same thing on her side.
Let's hear it.
Well, we also target Republicans. I'm sorry, but yeah, or those that lean towards that side, because it's amazing. It's amazing. You know, I ran for the state senate for a couple of tries at that in my district. And we did a lot of targeting. We have a very sophisticated database that actually ranks independents. And after a while, though, I would occasionally go to the wrong door and the wrong address and have a fantastic conversation with someone. And after a while, I just began to think, I'm not sure we should be targeting in this district, because there was something to talk about with essentially everyone, almost everyone. There's a few, okay. But I mean, almost everyone, and I've become even less of a fan of targeting over the years. So, but when it comes to independents, these I think Bill is absolutely right about this. There are very few people who are really in that middle, unknown kind of a territory.
Later here on PBS 6, the Arizona-Mexico border is not just about drugs and illegal immigration. It's also about cooperation.
We don't see two countries. We see a region.
From protecting the environment to first responders, Nancy Montoya shows you how those who live and work along the border are building bridges, not walls. Coming up later on Arizona Week. Now we'll continue our Journalist Roundtable discussion. Once again, with me in the studio are Christopher Conover, Dylan Smith, and Becky Palek. My interview with the party leaders was earlier this week, so I want to ask you three here to reflect on what they said about cutting through the national narrative. And really, again, Christopher, on those low ballot races like school boards and some town council races that are being held this year, when all we hear about is Trump and Clinton.
It's going to be interesting because there is a long time what they call coattail effect. If there is a popular candidate up towards the top of the ballot, in this case the presidential race, and Republicans or Democrats come out in force for that candidate, it certainly has an effect down ballot because if party faithful are voting for whomever as they move down the ballot, they'll just keep voting very often for those party in other races. The interesting thing with this race is, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the unfavorables for both Mr. Clinton and
Ms. Clinton and Mr. Trump.
I'm sorry, yeah, Ms. Clinton and Mr. Trump.
Years of habit.
Years of habit. They both have such high unfavorables. I've talked to regular voters out on the street and said, I can't vote for either of them. I'm just skipping the presidential race.
But are those people still going to go vote for the other races?
That's the question. Some say they will, and some say they're just throwing their hands up and not even going to vote at all.
I think that is something that will be interesting to see how it plays out, whether we see an undervote at the top of the ticket, because neither of these candidates have, at least thus far, inspired a whole lot of enthusiasm from their members of their respective parties. Will people still turn out to the polls and, as most people do, independents included, end up voting down the rest of the partisan line? Or will it somehow inspire a little bit more crossover between candidates?
Dylan, what did you think about Bill Beard's comments about independence? I feel like we generally hear that that's a conundrum for parties, and instead he's saying, no, it's actually really easy for us to figure out. Is that what you're hearing?
Both parties, especially locally, the Democrats have a lot of information and a lot of data on people. The Republicans as well, a little bit more on the national level rather than specific data about Tucson area voters. But you can really depend on most people who are independents to either vote as a Democrat, as a Republican, right down the party line. And there's not that much of picking and choosing one from column A and one from column B. People, for the most part, really don't do that. A very small number of independents are sort of crossover voters who will vote for either party.
And I want to go back up to the top of the ticket, Christopher, with you. And the next thing below president will be the Senate race in Arizona. And John McCain this week was in Tucson, and you heard him talking about the effect of Trump on his race, or at least what he thinks of Trump.
We did, and we talked a great deal about it after he received an endorsement from the Border Patrol Council. And of course, one of the questions that always comes up for candidates not running for president, especially Republicans, is how do you feel about Donald Trump? And Trump has taken a couple of shots at Senator McCain. Senator McCain was very clear. He will support the Republican nominee. When we asked, does that mean you will support Mr. Trump? He kept saying, I will support the Republican nominee. He would not actually come out and say, I support Donald Trump. But he also thinks it will have an effect on his race because of the number of people who have concerns within the Republican Party about a Trump presidency. So he thinks it will have an effect on his race. The time's going to tell, though, really what the voters do. And as I said earlier, I won't predict ever what a voter will do because I'm generally wrong.
And we don't have our crystal ball in the middle of the table.
No, we don't.
Which we always wish we had. I'm actually going to pivot now to some city news with Becky. Even though there's no election this year for the city, downtown news is always political. And so I just want to get an update from you on Rio Nuevo. You were at a meeting this week when they approved their budget. So what's going on in Rio Nuevo?
Well, I think the big news that everyone's excited about is hockey is coming downtown. So the Arizona Coyotes are bringing their minor league team, we still don't know their name, we'll know soon, to the arena at the Tucson Convention Center. So in order to make that deal happen, Rio Nuevo has chipped in $3.7 million to upgrade the arena and get it ready for professional level hockey. They're also funding the parking garage portion of the new hotel that's being built on Broadway downtown. That was a major part of the Rio Nuevo of old, was to get a hotel downtown to help support the convention center. And they're supporting the move of the Caterpillar regional headquarters to downtown Tucson as well. So they've really got a lot of projects coming up.
How does that compare to sort of the scope of their work in recent years?
I think in recent years we've seen Rio Nuevo transition into a very productive board, and they've been gearing up for all the projects that we're about to see happen.
And you also reported this week that the development on the west side of I-10 is sort of changing hands, at least the players involved are changing. So what's the update on that one?
Right, so that project has been going on since at least 2008, where the city had a planned area development agreement with a developer. Plans fell through, financing wasn't available, a lot of things caused delays. Now Rio Nuevo is buying out the city's stake in that project. It was a performance bond, they're cashing it in for the city. And they're also helping to fund an expansion of the Mercado out there that's a really popular little retail hangout spot. So there'll be more of that, more places for people to shop and eat.
So what changes about that project now that the city's out and Rio Nuevo is in?
Well, Rio Nuevo is taking a hard line on this developer. They're saying if they don't meet these very strict deadlines, they'll foreclose and they'll get a different developer to do the project. That's wait and see. If it happens, we have to see how they react.
So that kind of is in line with some of the stuff we were hearing 5, even 10 years ago about the city not necessarily having contracts with developers that actually held them accountable for completing their projects. Rio Nuevo is taking the opposite stand on this one.
They say their contracts include those kind of clawback measures. Now, whether they have to use them, we don't know.
And then also you did an update on the RTA. It's all downtown, it's all transportation and development. So they also were looking to set their budget that will begin on July 1st. What are the plans for the next year of RTA? I'm sorry, the Regional Transportation Authority, I should say first.
Right, so actually the RTA is kind of planning ahead to see what their next phase would look like. So they're already gearing up and talking about how they might reauthorize the RTA. At the same time, they have a lot of projects in the original plan they need to finish. So a lot of big projects are on their to-do list for next year. Some of them were projects that were delayed from last year, so a lot of carryover.
And Dylan, all of this kind of goes hand in hand. Development and transportation goes hand in hand with the streetcar. And you had a story this week about some concerns about the hours of that. So they're being cut this summer?
Maybe. They're part of one of these really smaller cuts the city made to try and fill their budget deficit and make sure that we came out even for next year was about $140,000, $150,000 in cuts to the streetcar, cutting back late night hours on Thursday night, Friday and Saturday night, where they had been running until 2 a.m. They were dialing that back to 10 p.m. and then midnight on the weekends. But the 4th Avenue Merchants Association and some other restaurants and bars downtown and along that stretch didn't really like that, even though ridership is not, very heavy that late at night. They still want to have that running. So the city has pushed back, they say, those schedule changes so that the mayor and council can take another look at them. So it may or may not end up changing.
And one of the criticisms I heard was that this is sort of so-called proof that the streetcar is really here to serve students. The students have left, now the hours are being cut. Did you hear that in your reporting?
That is one way of looking at it, but even while the students are here, during those hours, ridership is, not at its peak. So I don't know if it's specifically a student issue or a timing issue, or perhaps, running cars that late but a bit less frequently might be, sort of a middle option.
And the city just sees it as it's very expensive to run empty trains, so they're trying to cut back.
Even though we might see empty trains other parts of the day, or that whole criticism about when buses are empty or full. And actually next week, Becky, the city council is going to likely approve its budget.
Right.
On Tuesday night.
That's the schedule.
All right, well, we'll be watching for that too. That's it for this week. We talked about a lot of races. We threw out a lot of names. We skipped some names. So if you want to get it all straight, it's all on our Election Center on our website. Thanks for watching.